Lesson 18, Using Classes. Within this lesson, you will learn the basics of object-oriented PHP. You will see how a class is defined and how you can access methods and properties from third-party classes. The topics covered are 1. Object-oriented PHP data types, and 2. Creating and using objects. Let's get started. If you prefer, PHP can be written in an object-oriented fashion. In PHP 5, the object-oriented functionality of the language has been greatly improved. If you are familiar with other object-oriented languages, such as C++ or Java, you may want to use the object-oriented approach to programming PHP. If you're used to other procedural languages, you may not want to use objects at all. As you can see, there are several ways to solve the same problem. If you are new to programming and PHP, you probably don't have a preference for any particular method at this point. Object-oriented concepts are definitely much easier to understand if you have no programming experience at all than if you have a background in a procedural language, but unfortunately, object-oriented methods are not a topic that we can thoroughly cover in 10 minutes or less in this tutorial. Instead, we will just concentrate on how a class is created and referenced in PHP. That way, if you do want to use objects, you will be able to develop scripts by using object-oriented methods. You will also be able to pick up and use some of the many freely available third-party class libraries that are available for PHP from resources like the one at phpclasses.org. A class is the template structure that defines an object. It can contain functions or class methods and variables, also known as class properties or attributes. Each class is made up of a set of PHP statements that define how to perform a task or set of tasks that you want to repeat frequently. The class can contain both private methods, which are only used internally to perform the class's functions, and public methods, which you can use to interface with the class. A good class hides its inner workings and only includes the public methods that are required to provide a simple interface to its functionality. When bundling complex blocks of programming into a class, any script that uses that class doesn't need to worry about exactly how a particular operation is performed. All that is required is knowledge of the class's public methods. There are loads of free third-party classes available for PHP, so it may be a waste of your time to implement a feature in PHP when so many exist already. At first, it may seem like there isn't any real advantage to using a class over using functions that have been modularized into an include. It's not that object-oriented is necessarily a better approach to programming, it's mainly just a different way of thinking. Whether you choose to develop your own classes or not is mostly a matter of preference. One of the great things about object-oriented programming is that it allows your code to scale into very large projects easily. In object-oriented programming, a class can inherit the properties of another and extend it, which means that its functionality has already been developed and can be reused and adapted to fit a particular situation. This is called inheritance, and it is a key feature of object-oriented development. A class is a grouping of various functions and variables, which is exactly how it looks when written in PHP. A class definition looks a lot like a function definition. It begins with the keyword class and an identifier, and is followed by the class definition, which is contained in a pair of curly brackets. Here is a somewhat trivial example of a class, just to show you how one looks. It contains just one property, myValue, and one method, myMethod. If you already know about object-oriented programming and you want to get a head start with object-oriented PHP, you can go online and see documentation at this website. If you want to create an instance of an object from a class, you need to use the new keyword in PHP, like this. In this example, myClass is the name of a class that must be defined in the script, normally in an include file, and server myObject becomes a myClass object. The methods and properties defined in myClass can be referenced for server myObject. Here are a couple of generic examples. The arrow symbol, which is made up of a hyphen and greater than symbol, indicates a method or property of the given object. To reference the current object within the class definition, you use the special name this. This example defines my class with a method that references one of the object properties. This example makes two separate calls to my method. The first time it displays the default value of my value. An assignment within the class specifies a default value for a property. The second call comes after that property has had a new value assigned. The class uses this to reference its own property and doesn't care or even know that in the script its name is server myObject. If the class includes a special method known as constructor, arguments can be supplied in parentheses when an object is created, and those values are later passed to the constructor function. This is usually done to initialize a set of properties for each object instance, and it looks very similar to this. Using a third-party class. The easiest way to learn how to work with classes is to go ahead and just use one. You can do this by taking a look at a popular third-party class written by Manuel Lemos, which provides a comprehensive way to validate email addresses. You can download this class from this link and save the file locally as email_validation.php. Manuel's class validates an email address not only by checking that its format is correct, but also by performing a domain name lookup to ensure that it can be delivered. It even connects to the remote mail server to make sure the given mailbox actually exists. The email_validation.php script defines a class called email_validation_class, so you will first need to create a new instance of a validator object called server validator, like this. You can set a number of properties for your new class. Some are required in order for the class to work properly, and others allow you to change the default behavior. Each object instance will require that you set the properties that contain the mailbox and domain parts of a real email address. This is the address that will be given to the remote mail server when checking a mailbox. There are no default values for these properties. They will always have to be set like this. The optional timeout property tells how many seconds to wait when connected to a remote mail server before giving up. Setting the debug property will cause the text of the communication with the remote server to be displayed on screen. You never really need to do this, though, unless you are interested in knowing what is going on. This statement defines a timeout of 10 seconds and turns on the debug output. This is a complete list of adjustable properties for a validator object. The methods in email validation class are mostly private. You can't call them directly, but the internal code is made up of a set of functions. If you look at email_validation.php, you will see function definitions including tokenize, getLine, and verify result lines, but none of these are useful outside the object itself. The only public method in a validator object is named validateEmailBox, and when called, it initiates the email address validation of a string argument. This example shows how validateEmailBox is called. The return value from validateEmailBox shows whether the validation check is successful. If you have turned on the debug attribute, you will also see output similar to this in addition to the output from the script. In this lesson, you learned about object-oriented PHP and how to use classes in your own script. You can now test your knowledge in the quiz area, access the scripts we learned in the lab, or go through the lesson again. The choice is yours. Thank you for choosing Sam's Teacher